and thanks for spending a little bit of your lunchtime here with us. Today's a really big day for Mobility 2035. I'll let Claire tell you the good news. But I'm really excited that Claire was able to join us. The mobility plan has been super controversial. It's been in the news a lot. But I, for one, am super proud of LA for looking at a bold vision for the future. And Claire is going to help us understand what the plan means for us and our work here at LADOT, in our everyday work, since it's a long-range plan. So I've talked to her a little bit about some of the issues that, some of the things we're working on, and there's several people at LADOT who helped put it together. So this will be an informal discussion, and Claire's going to leave some time for questions and answers so that we can get into it. So thanks for coming.
Great. Thank you, Bridget. Well, I'm delighted to be here today, and as Bridget mentioned, this is actually a really wonderful day for us to be gathered together and chatting, because the mobility plan, for the third time, was adopted by City Council today. So January 20th is an important day. The mobility plan is now formally adopted. We still have a few more amendments we're going to take forth in February and March, but we do have an adopted plan again. So it's a vision plan. It's a long-range policy document, and I think we all sometimes struggle, like, well, what does this mean for us? How does this change things for us, in any way? As Bridget mentioned, there's been a lot of controversy around this plan. We are in litigation. There are a number of lawsuits that have been filed against this plan, but that doesn't mean the plan isn't in effect. So just want to make you aware that while you might hear things out in the press, the plan is still in effect, and we are now, abiding by this plan in terms of the kind of it really helps inform kind of the thinking we do in all of our day-to-day jobs. Planning is just by kind of the charter responsible for developing the general plans, but DOT was an absolutely key partner in the development of this plan. I mean, we couldn't have done it without all of your leadership. I mean, Salita sat with us at the table last August when we got this adopted, and we really see going forward as a key partnership. We didn't just adopt this plan and then get to hand it over to you and expect you guys to kind of, carry this the next 20 years. We want to be alongside of you for the next 20 years as we work to develop and implement this plan. And that means also for our sister departments over at Public Works. We really see all of us together working to help implement this plan, along with obviously other agencies. There's been a lot of talk, especially the controversy has been mostly around kind of the networks, and I'm going to talk about those, but I'm going to talk about those mostly at the end, because while they've garnered a lot of the attention, probably most of the attention, and sort of that's where a lot of the heartburn from the council office perspective is, that those really aren't the big part of the plan. There's a lot of other things this plan is doing that are actually going to assist you, hopefully, kind of every day, in your work. So I'm going to get into kind of what those are. So first of all, the plan sets new goals. The plan really kind of rethinks and how we kind of think about things going forward. It's really kind of representative of kind of the change that's happening. And so while change is always challenging, and even while I think some of the council offices, kind of struggle with some of the changes that's occurring, they all did, 9-3, they voted in support of this. So these are kinds of things that now as a city, these are goals that we say that we're going to utilize when we're making decisions going forward. And each of these goals is followed with objectives that are quantifiable, that we're going to measure how our success is, and then each of them also has policies. And it's those policies, I'm actually going to walk through a number of those policies today and talk about how those policies might help influence and guide the work that you guys are doing here. Some of these goals, the reasons they're important, I mean, other than I think that they kind of stand for themselves, but they talk about, we want to look at things that are help saving lives, increasing kind of person throughput, things that are helping hopefully ease congestion by providing people, more options. One of the ways that we're going to I mentioned objectives, this isn't all of them, but again, we want to use quantifiable ways of saying, how do we figure out how we're doing? And so in the past, we've really looked at largely at, how we're doing in terms of, travel times and travel speeds and level of service. And in this new plan, we're saying we might still be aware of those things, but we care a lot more about things like having 0 fatalities or increasing the number of persons who are walking and biking and taking transit. Or we care a lot more about the number of healthy air quality days we have, or even the amount of the improvements in water quality, because obviously our streets also function as our storm drain system, and we want to care a lot more about reducing collisions. So those become some of the objectives, and again, the plan has a lot more, and I would encourage you to go take a look at the plan and see what are some of the quantifiable objectives that we're going to measure ourselves against, because those are the kind of things that you might want to take a look at when you're developing, your projects or doing the kind of things you work on. So I'm just going to run through a number of the policies kind of tied to each of the different goals, and sometimes I combine them just for ease of conversation. But one of the key ones is complete streets. So again, the way we tended to think about things in the past, we tended to kind of talk about modes kind of separately. But now we're really thinking about decisions should be made kind of looking at kind of what are the needs and the goals and the challenges of all the different modes, so that we're thinking not only about how cars fit into that street, but how also are we making that street safe and a quality and experience for pedestrians? Or how are we making sure that we've built in places where trucks can pull over and do loading and unloading, being mindful of the fact that a bicyclist might be coming in there, or the turning movement for a truck or a bus, but also what that does to a pedestrian that might be trying to get across. I know you guys actually have a new complete street committee, so obviously Department of Transportation is doing a lot already to kind of move in this direction. I think you guys had one this morning. So again, it's about having those conversations. We're not expecting everybody just to kind of sit in there by themselves in a room thinking, well, how do I make this complete street? It's really about us all working together, because many times we're going to be faced with challenging trade-offs. What does it mean to make a street complete in a specific location? And it's going to, again, require us to kind of keep talking. I've also kind of thrown access for all on here, which is in some ways very similar to the complete streets, but again, it's recognizing that we want to be mindful of kind of all modes of travel. I'll get into when I get into the networks at the very end. There starts to be kind of some places where we said, there are specific modes that might be favored on a specific street if something's in our transit network or our bicycle network, but I'll get more into that. But globally, we're kind of trying to make sure that we're keeping a balance of what are the variety of different needs by all the modes when we're thinking about design, whether we're doing striping or turning movements. So one of the key components we did as developing as part of this plan to help us think about, well, what does complete streets mean? We've got, so we developed this complete street design guide, and this was done in collaboration with a lot of you in the room, as well as folks in Public Works. And we know that one of the reasons we put this document together is we really wanted to have a document that gave you guidance, that we know that there's standards that we have in place today, but sometimes those standards don't really reach out and talk about the kinds of innovations that we know the community and many here even in City Hall are asking for. There's things when we think about complete streets, we need some new tools to be at our disposal, and so this document, the Complete Street Design Guide, is kind of that document that you can look to when you've been asked to think about something in a new way. And so this document gives you, for a variety of things, it focuses on things you can be doing in the sidewalk, it focuses on things on the street, and it talks about where they might fit. So again, you're not just kind of like left, well, this is new, and how do I make sure this is a safe thing that I'm being asked to do that's a non-standard? Well, the document includes things you should consider and kind of design guidance. It also talks about kind of where it might be appropriate or not to apply a specific thing. For example, it talks about protected bicycle lane. That's not yet a standard at the state level, but we know there's a lot of interest in putting protected bicycle lanes in. You guys have already have done one out in Reseda, but in using kind of one treatment, we know there's a variety of different ways they can be done. So this document, the Complete Street Design Guide, we think is a great tool for you to be, again, having at your disposal when you're thinking about kind of when you've been asked to do kind of new things. The nice thing about the Complete Street Design Guide is that we didn't look at it as a document that we adopted once and then we said, okay, that's kind of the document that's going to guide us for the next 20 years. We really see this as a living document. So there might be things in this document that initially were put there because they were new and they were innovative, and we didn't quite know how we wanted to do them, like protected bicycle lanes. But I imagine over the next few years, we'll kind of figure out what the best treatment is for a complete street, for a protected bicycle lane, for example. But there might be something new that we haven't even thought of, and that could go in this document. So the Street Standards Committee is being empowered with kind of the responsibility of updating on a regular basis the Complete Street Design Guide. So if there's something that you've heard about that's a new idea that we haven't put in here, come talk to us, and let's think about maybe putting it in here, because you might think it'd be really helpful if I had some greater directions, again, some ideas that talked about where that might fit. That would be really helpful. I should also mention that in addition to the Complete Street Design Guide, when we adopted this document, it's a companion document and to the mobility plan, we also adopted 2 of the NACDO design guides. So you also have those, so you have kind of a really nice suite of tools that, to give new direction. Sometimes though, I don't know if, does DOT do you guys do the detour facilities, or is that more BOE? That's okay. So oftentimes, obviously if you're doing detours, we want you to be thinking about how do we make sure that detour is mindful of the fact maybe there's a bicycle lane there, that detour, that the road construction is going to make that bicycle lane not accessible. So maybe as if you're I don't know how many of you work on detours, but maybe when you're doing that, again, the Complete Street Design Guide is a place you can take a look at, but just be mindful of the varying needs of pedestrians and bicycles or transit to be able to still get around safely while there's a detour going on. And I should also just mention that while I'm talking, if there's a question on a specific policy and you're like, well, I'm not sure how that would fit in with my work, or you have a question about, I'm happy to kind of stop and take questions as we go along. That also helps keep me not from just rambling on too fast. So this next one I really like. It's kind of talking about multimodal features. When we think about the transit system, for example, we know that one of the challenges or one of the barriers to entry for transit is that oftentimes not everybody kind of lives and works kind of right on top of transit. So there's been a lot of discussion around this concept of kind of first mile, last mile. And I think that has a huge role for you guys, because whether you're thinking about, again, like how does a bus interface with a transit stop? How do we make sure that we've provided enough space for the buses to kind of pull over, or is there space there for a kiss and ride, or some of the new features that are coming out, like car share and other things? How do we think about accommodating all those variety of modes around a specific stop? Because we know that, again, not everybody lives right there, and we don't certainly want to encourage everybody to drive to that transit stop. So thinking about multimodal features, whether again it's making sure that there's enough bicycle parking there, or that there's safe pedestrian access, is I think a kind of a fun one we're all going to be talking about for a long time. Open streets, obviously you guys have led the city in terms of thinking about open streets, but we thought it was so important we wanted to make sure it was a key policy in this document, because we certainly want to encourage you to keep doing more of them. And I think that, whether it's the kind of the parklets, or whether it's even more cyclovia, obviously many of you guys participate on things like cyclovia, whether you're the traffic person out there and making sure that bicycles are moving through, or the traffic is not going through where it's not supposed to cross through. But I think when we heard a lot from the community, these kinds of events are really critical. So these are moments for us to kind of celebrate. It's not just about moving cars. It's really about thinking about our streets as places. And I think that it provides us a nice opportunity to start thinking about our streets in a new way. The other opportunity, obviously, with open streets is then the public-private partnerships that can come from that. 'Cause again, I think that right now there's a lot, again, with change, there's a lot of the community, sometimes people get nervous about what change means. And so having events like this that open up opportunities for public-private partnerships is a way of also just kind of expanding public engagement and support for the plan. Because again, people see it as something that's not this big network segment that's going to come in, but it's these small things that incrementally kind of add up to helping people make change in their lives and start to think about streets in a new way. So technology obviously plays a large role. I mean, again, a lot of what you guys are already doing, it's fabulous when I go out and stand at Temple and Spring, and there's the information telling me when the next Dash bus is coming. Those are kind of things that we really support in this plan. So I encourage you to keep thinking about that. And you guys have a lot with, I guess, the Park First. Again, the information that tells people, where parking spaces are available, or when the transit is coming. We know that those things really make a big difference in helping people decide whether they're going to get out of their car or perhaps try something different. Because again, it's about facilitating people's awareness about all these new different kind of things. Obviously, I think I said enough there. Talked a little bit about community on the parklets, but community collaboration is a key. Because again, there's a lot of things about this plan that make people nervous. People are, again, scared of change, and we know that obviously the more you work with people, or so if you're just out talking to somebody on the street and starts to kind of demystify for them, what is happening, and helps people kind of understand, what's going on. So we know, obviously, this is an example from People Street, doing a great job of kind of helping bring the community in and keep getting engaged. And we think that community collaboration is a key area where the planning department can continue to work with you. So if you're going out to do, some outreach in the community, we're happy to come and kind of tag along or help you talk about what would be the right level of community engagement. Data is I'm going to say it's a big part of the mayor's, objectives. You guys have been putting a lot of data up on the dashboard, but we think that, so we want to memorialize the importance of data, through this plan, and really, prioritize it as a policy, and that we're going to start using data and helping to really make decisions. Because again, I think we think specifically about like the call for projects. We know in the past, it's been a very politically driven process. You guys have to go around all the council offices, say, I want this and I want that, and then we're kind of left scrambling, really quickly to try to put together, what are the projects. So we think that using data is a way that we can actually help you. So again, the planning department start working kind of earlier on to kind of figure out, well, where are really the key places we should be focusing, what are very scarce resources. So, looking at places where you have the highest, numbers of people, looking at places where you have the lowest income. Obviously, you guys are already using data in terms of thinking about the high injury network. So data, we think, is just going to be a key piece for all of us continuing to use as we go forward. And the kind of data sets you're going to look at are going to vary based on the different funding source, because you're going to really be driven by what are the kind of the criteria and the things that are important for that particular funding source. But again, we think this is going to be a great way to help us kind of sift through all the variety of project ideas and help us really then be much more competitive and more successful in achieving future grant applications. TDM, we already have actually a transit demand management ordinance, but we think that it could use probably a refresher, and so we certainly put in here because we want to continue to focus on the value of it. So I think most of you guys, all of you know what TDM is, and we think that it's going to continue to play a big role as we move forward in the future. Because obviously, as we're going to continue to densify in places like in downtown and Hollywood, we're going to want to have perhaps a greater range of tools that we can be working with developers, so they can be ensuring that their future projects, that if they're bringing in 100 units or 1,000 workers, that they've got in place the kind of tools to facilitate those workers or those residents being able to access that area, not necessarily using their car. So we're looking at things like transit passes. I mean, a lot of things we've already got in place today. More bicycle parking, other kind of tools. Where we are looking maybe to kind of update this and refresh it a little bit, especially in line with the new SB 743, the VMT ordinance. Obviously, I think the other thing is the transportation management organizations. Again, a lot of this has to do with people's just awareness that these kind of things are available to them, making it easy for people. So I know it's been very successful out in the Warner Center. I think we're looking now at doing a TMO around Century City, maybe even one downtown. So again, these are important policies, and looking forward to working with you guys on trying to help set some of these up. Parking and land use. Parking is obviously, it's like the third rail in the city. I mean, it's one of those things, every time you talk with communities about trying to maybe reduce parking, people just kind of flip out. But obviously, especially parking on street, it's a lot of valuable real estate that's being utilized for cars just kind of sitting there. And so we know that, I think that this is going to be a topic that we're going to be certainly tackling with our recode effort, and I certainly look forward to kind of starting to, again, brainstorm how we can make sure that we're really much more successfully, using our streets, whether it's thinking about, well, maybe we really should be devoting so much of this space for parking, maybe it really needs to be more for, maybe this is a really important layover space, and again, if we're trying to encourage more transit, or maybe this is a really important corridor where, UPS vehicles are needing to pull over a lot, so maybe we're starting to think about trading off some of that on-street parking supply for some of those other things, or maybe it's more important to give up that on-street parking for a bicycle corral. So again, it's about kind of balancing, all those different needs. There's also, in terms of the off-street parking supply, I mentioned recode, that hopefully through our recode effort, we're starting to think about maybe how we can actually reduce kind of our parking standards. There's a lot of parking in the city. I hear like 7 to 9 parking spaces for every car. It's a lot of land we've devoted to parking, and I know that there's probably opportunities. I think it's probably something that Jay might be working on in his new role, is how can we start to think about the parking, the off-street parking supply we have, and maybe perhaps use it more efficiently and provide, encourage more kind of shared parking so that we don't have to keep building, parking for individual parking development projects. So alternative metrics, I mentioned, a level of service. Obviously, that's something that we've been using for a long time. Everybody's really comfortable with it. Communities love it because they they see that as a really powerful tool. It's helped them kind of, stop projects, or it's given us the input, the tools to be able to add kind of left-hand and right-hand turn lanes in the past. But it really is kind of a new day. We didn't there is another policy about VMT, but we don't specifically identify in this plan what the metrics should be for the city, but we do know because of SB 743 that at least at CEQA, we are going to be moving from an LOS to a VMT, vehicle miles traveled, as the metric for analyzing projects. As a city, again, we didn't want to constrain ourselves. We felt like, again, but as we move forward, I can imagine that we're going to be having some conversations about when is it appropriate for us to continue to collect LOS data, and where does the VMT roll. So this policy just kind of sets the table, basically invites us to have those conversations and to acknowledge that there's opportunity for looking at new things in the future. The other thing kind of under this is all under our environmental goal. And again, you guys have already kind of led the way. We've got a picture of your commuter express in terms of, again, there's opportunities. You're running the transit system. We continuously look for places to, have zero emission vehicles. We think there's also opportunities to, perhaps, encourage the greater development of electrical vehicle charging stations and kind of other things that help encourage people with new technologies. I keep wondering what we're going to do with all those gas stations in the future. So I did promise I was going to get into the networks just a little bit, because again, they really have been kind of at the forefront of a lot of the conversation and the concern from the community. So we developed a number of networks in the plan. They are concepts. They do not give the city kind of a mandate to go out tomorrow and build these things, as much as we might like that, and in some ways that would be fabulous. But we've said to the community, these are concepts. We're going to be continuing to work with you, doing additional level of environmental, because obviously we did an EIR for this plan, but we didn't know the details. We don't know specifically, what that cross section might look like for our transit network, our bicycle network. So we really will have to go back out and do additional information. But we did, take a stab at saying, well, where are the places we think there is the most interest, specifically like in walking. So we have a pedestrian kind of infrastructure map that basically obviously values walking. We have a neighborhood enhanced network. We pulled this from the bicycle plan, really looking at kind of local and collector streets, where we think that we can do some of the things that I called out from the Complete Street Design Guide to, just to slow traffic down and make it a calmer street so people feel comfortable walking and bicycling. So not just about bicycling, but it is about, how can we facilitate using our local streets as ways to, connect people to their schools, to their neighborhood, to their library. I can't remember, I'm always bad at remembering statistics. Jay, or Tommy, maybe you guys remember, there's like a high number of trips that are like less than 2 or 3 miles. It's like 75 or 80% of trips are less than 2 or 3 miles. And so we think they really want to focus on this neighborhood network and helping build it out, because if you can make it easy for if somebody goes, oh wow, that neighborhood street really is a nice way for me to connect, where before they maybe used to always kind of jump in their car, or maybe somebody's comfortable letting their kid, walk to school, because we've made that local street, a lot more comfortable and safer. So I mentioned the transit network. So we identified a number of about almost 300 miles of streets in the city that we thought would really be good for transit. These are streets that already have high volumes of transit on them. We looked at places in collaboration with Metro and our other transit providers where we thought there might be benefits of putting kind of additional kind of transit infrastructure out there. Maybe some of those streets really could benefit from a transit-only lane, or during the peak hours, maybe even all the time, or maybe it didn't necessarily warrant a transit-only lane. Maybe there were additional things we could do, whether it's prepayment boarding, more information about when the next bus is coming. Again, things that just make the experience and the quality of that experience for the transit rider just much higher quality. Because again, there's a high barrier to entry for people taking transit. It's like, well, People think it's not reliable, it's not coming, it's not coming on time. I don't know when it comes, I don't know where it goes. So doing things that really help kind of elevate the network and make it easier for people to kind of know about where it's going. But again, this is mostly around Metro and other transit providers. So this is not something we're just going to kind of do on our own. Again, we've just kind of laid out a framework, and obviously working and collaborating with Metro over the next 20 years to kind of figure out what's the next street we should be focusing on. Obviously, we've already got Wilshire in through a lot of work that you guys did. We're looking at Vermont corridor right now. So they're looking at Van Nuys corridor, but we're starting to be looking at what's the next corridor that they can tee up. As a result of the conversations we had around this transit network, Metro did go out and do a strategic bus network analysis. They brought a consultant in because they were really intrigued by the idea that we were bringing forth that said, we really should be thinking about which streets, really should be, those high capacity corridors. And they're starting to really think about maybe having a 5, a 10, and a 15-minute kind of network. And hopefully we can be working, as they start to develop that, we can be working with them to figure out what are some of the improvements they need on those streets to make sure that they really can, let's say they're picking a specific corridor for a 5-minute network, 5-minute bus network. What can we do to make sure that really happens? The bicycle network has probably been the most contentious of all the different networks. We think that this is a really important one. Again, it's built from the 2010 bicycle plan that laid out almost 700 miles of bicycle lanes. And what we said to this conversation was it was probably more important to have fewer lanes but higher quality. And we heard a lot from the community saying that a lot of people weren't comfortable just being in a bicycle lane, but they really wanted more of that protected bicycle lane. So we looked at about 300 miles. Again, there isn't a lot of them. I think we have Reseda, we've got MyFig. I think it's going to go into construction later this year. But again, the idea that over the next 20 years we would build out, a 300-mile system of protected bicycle lanes that works then in collaboration with places where we already have bicycle paths, like along the LA River or the beach or the Expo line, start to really make a nice connected system where people can, kind of regionally connect between different neighborhoods, on something that really would be attractive for that kind of that 8 to 80 crowd. So, but we were mindful of all the different modes. We do have a vehicle network. It's smaller. We really were focusing on where were the streets that we perhaps needed to make sure we were facilitating access to the vehicle or to the freeway system. Obviously, all streets still are going to be for cars, but we did want to kind of focus on this. And I think there's particular interest from folks from Fixing Angelino Stuck in Traffic, FAST, who's been a big proponent of this plan. They're really interested in maybe looking at some vehicle network segments, I think, in the valley. It's part of the first thing out the gates. We might be having some conversations with you about that. And then obviously goods movement. We don't have a goods movement network in here. There are obviously a number of streets that are already identified by Metro as streets that are really important for goods movement. We felt like they were the kind of the keeper of that network, and we didn't want to embed that here because that network changes, and they're really the ones who kind of push that information out. But we certainly did want to recognize the importance of making sure that what we do in our daily decisions, to continue to support goods movement, because obviously it plays a vital role in the economy of our city. So I think I had this slide earlier, just to kind of remind you some of the things that we're hoping that we're going to be able to kind of measure improvements around based on all the kind of the variety of things that we're going to do in implementing this plan. So, and as I said earlier on, you're not alone. I actually now have a team. Originally when we were developing this plan, I had David, who's actually sitting here in the audience, and I had a woman at my law, so it was really kind of just the two of them. And now we have a couple other family members who have just joined us. Chris Pena is actually going to be working mostly on the river, but obviously the river intersects with streets in a lot of places, so we're hoping that we're going to kind of bring him into some of these conversations as well. And then Lena and Brian have recently joined us, and one of the things we're doing to kind of help again, kind of facilitate conversation in the city, is I've assigned each of them kind of one of the 4 geographies. These are the geo teams that our department's divided by. So David's going to be responsible for kind of the west side. So if you're working in the west side or coastal area and you have some questions about a project you're doing, David's going to be the person for you to talk to. Or if you're working on something in the south or east part of the city, my law is the person. Or if you're working in the central area, Lena Mick. And then in the valley is Brian Masakawa. So again, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to be much more engage with you guys. So again, if you have a project and you're working on, we feel like you could really use some input from us to help have conversations with the community. We're happy to have those conversations. So I think with that is the end of my talk, and happy to answer any questions. Is something I didn't cover? Any questions you have, concerns? Tommy.
So there's a lot of projects that are in the pipeline, so there's developer improvements or grant funding projects that are likely to be consistent with the building plan. So how do those get vetted through our department? And second question, can you also describe the role of the Street Standards Committee, the makeup, how they play a part in implementing the plan?
Absolutely. So I'll answer the first question. I'll answer the first question first. So I think we've created a kind of an offshoot of the Street Standards Committee that Tommy's referring to, and we've created what we call our Streets Working Group because we recognize that there is this kind of moment of transition, and there's probably a lot of questions whether you get with your doing capital projects, like what does this mean, or a development project, and I've already imposed certain mitigations on that project and maybe inconsistent. So if you're kind of struggling with that, we are happy to have you come to the Streets Working Group, or give me a call or reach out to Tommy and Jay, are also pretty familiar with that group. We did have a meeting, two cycles ago. The meeting we did, I think, invite a number of folks here in DOT to come and present their projects there. And I think we recognize in most of those cases that we were not really going to touch the project, because we realized that if the project is far enough along that we're like, that was funded a couple of years ago, the contract is already in place, we can't really make any changes. But if it's really early on in a project and there's an opportunity to, the contracts haven't been signed, you're not far enough along with the design, let's talk about it. But I'm not sure there are that many projects that we went through most of the ones that. Okay, great. And then to the Street Standards Committee. So the Street Standards Committee was actually adopted by ordinance in the zoning code, and it's basically a formal committee that includes planning and DOT and Bureau of Engineering, and it basically empowers that committee to be, so they're kind of the keeper of the standard plan. So when we adopted a new street standards as part of this, I completely forgot about talking about that. Just feels like we've had those new standards out for a couple months now. So we have new street standards. The S470 was updated, and we did that through the Street Standards Committee. I mentioned earlier that the Street Standards Committee is also going to be the place where if we want to make changes formally to the Complete Street Design Guide, that'll be the place that we do that. We probably will, though, use that meeting, we'll probably convene that group only when we're kind of ready to actually make the change and kind of vote on it. We really see the Streets Working Group as kind of the behind-the-scenes, place to kind of bring and actually have more of a discussion, because that is not subject to the Brown Act. Or if you have a project that's going to be going to the STPOC and you'd like to kind of vet it before you actually go and kind of speak in a more public venue, the Streets Working Group would be a great place to kind of have that conversation. No, yes, Miles.
Claire, as we move from vision making, which this Mobility 2035 vision making process, to implementation, what have you've been doing outreach, for a year now or a year and a half?
So the plan was about 4 years in the making.
Okay, and outreach through the whole time, probably?
Yes, and certainly much more at the beginning.
Periodic stages. What have you found to be the most effective outreach approach? Has that been a learning process? I think it would be. It would be for me if I were doing it. But so, what have you learned over time that is the best way to go from vision making to actual implementation?
No, that's a really good question. So when we were developing the plan, we used a lot of different tools, whether traditional kind of workshops, we used charrettes, we had a whole online kind of forum for discussion. But when we shift now to implementation, we've been thinking much more about kind of, on the grounds, really much more kind of smaller collaborative discussions. And a lot of our strategy going forward has been informed by some of the challenges we have seen trying to implement bicycle facilities. and in particular like bicycle lanes over the last number of years. And that's really, really kind of helped kind of reshift our thinking before we tended to go out and go into a community and say, we've prioritized your area for putting a bicycle lane. And actually this is some of the work that David and others in your group here were involved in those conversations. And there was a lot of resistance. I think again, there's been a huge backlash against bicycles. I'm not quite sure why. I think bicycling is a great form of transportation, but they seem to have earned the wrath of a number of people. So somehow bicycle lanes were really not kind of welcome in a lot of neighborhoods. So I think with this mobility plan, we're starting to kind of think about maybe we go out more and have conversations with communities, in a very, very small focused area and say, we've targeted your area because maybe there's a lot of density in your area. Again, looking at that data and saying, well, again, it's a big city. Where should we be focusing on? And we say, well, this is an area of the highest density. This is where some of your lowest incomes are. Because equity has been a big part of the conversation. Again, making sure we put improvements in places that really haven't seen the kind of investments in the past. And so maybe go out, reach out to those communities, but kind of more from a neutral tone. Instead of saying, we're going to put a bicycle lane in your area or we're going to do a crosswalk here, it's maybe going and doing some listening and hearing from the community what are their challenges. Maybe they're telling us that cars go too fast, or that their kid's not comfortable crossing the street, going to school. So kind of using more kind of a listening session to kind of help identify what might be the kind of improvements. I imagine some of the improvements that they might be asking for maybe not be things that are even in your purview. There might not be a Bureau of Engineering. We might have to bring in some other departments, and they say, the trash isn't getting picked up enough. So but we want to use this vehicle as a way of kind of gathering this information and then kind of bringing the right partners together. We haven't really completely launched that program yet, but that's kind of at least our kind of approach going forward. Again, much more like listen from the community about what are the things that they want. Yes.
So I work in the B permits, and so we work with developers. So the problem that we're having now is we have developers submitting plans that are based on previous planning documents to widen the streets and such. And we've come to a point where we have to question everything that is we previously approved. I was wondering, was there any thought of what happens to plans in the interim with BOE in order to address the change? Went from what was widening and now not so much widening. What is the plan to address those as they come through? Right.
So a lot of it depends on kind of when that project came through. So we did put together a technical bulletin, and we did that in collaboration mostly with Bureau of Engineering to make sure that we had kind of specific rules in place. So if a project, this had mostly to do like when they were being required to do a street dedication and a widening or not. And so if a project had come through before the mobility plan was adopted, and I'm really talking about the first adoption back in August 11th, 2015. So if a project had been already had its kind of letter from BOE before then, or they'd come through, maybe they were vested in planning, they would be subject to kind of the old rules in terms of the street dimension in terms of that particular street. If they came through for their approvals kind of after August 11th, they'd be subject to the new street standards. There was a little bit of a gray area for projects that perhaps they had their letter from BOE, but I think hadn't gone through planning, so if it wasn't a by right, it had some discretionary action, then maybe there was an opportunity for them to kind of pick and choose. I mean, in most cases, the street dedication would actually be less under the new plan, so most projects were wanting to have the new street dedication applied. So that hopefully answers the question there. I think the other kind of the bigger challenge I think we're seeing is that you mentioned plans, and we know there's a lot of community plans. We're having to sift through those right now, where it called out for X street to be widened, or there were some streets that said it shouldn't be widened at all. There said a lot of streets to be widened. The mobility plan now supersedes those, and we're going through systematically and updating those community plans. We did put language in the resolution when the mobility plan was adopted that basically gave that authority to general plans, that those community plans, it's going to take us a while to actually change those documents, but the mobility plan is where you need to look for what the street dedication or what the street designation actually is. Does that answer your questions? Kind of, yes, maybe no?
One other thing that I think consider is, if it's a mitigation, I think we talked about this before, we have probably less latitude even, right? Because it's already kind of locked in, and unless you can come back and say, you have a substitute mitigation that's of equal value
Right.
or better, unfortunately, even with the new policy direction, you're kind of caught in that CEQA dilemma. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of discussed, and you kind of have to honor, even though it may be against your current policies, you're sort of locked in.
Right.
And unless you can come back with something, that's a substitute that provides similar benefit, and not do the widening, you're sort of stuck. I think that's what I'm saying.
Can you just repeat what you said, just so I want to make sure everyone.
Yeah, so Jay was talking about how the, he was talking about, sorry, my brain is going,
mitigation.
the mitigation, so like, so
It's a
if
bit
a
different than
right.
street dedication.
Yeah, sorry, just standing there, my brain freezes sometimes. So a project might have had a mitigation and talked about a widening or a right-hand turn lane, kind of outside of even its street designation, and there was an EIR for it. So again, if that project was done beforehand, we probably are going to have to honor that mitigation, just protection from CEQA. But there may be opportunities, and I would certainly encourage you to take a look at that. Is there a way of meeting the spirit of that mitigation through something that's an alternative to perhaps to that right-hand turn lane?
Yeah, so one possible method could be that, instead of doing the widening, for example.
So one possible method could be, instead of doing the widening, so should I just whisper? So instead of doing the widening, you may want to step back and maybe work with sort of the planning side again. And we kind of ask the question, if we are able to do something different than the widening and get a kind of a clearance through the planning department and kind of work that out, because we do have a provision that says that if you can provide an alternative mitigation that's of equal or superior value,